The way I see it, you have two ways to invest. One, you can try to time the market, or two, you can just forget about trying to time the market and just invest consistently and automatically using dollar cost averaging. In a previous video, I talked about the pros and cons of trying to time the market. And using actual historical data for the S&P 500, I made a spreadsheet that tells you how much money you would have ended up with if you had timed the market perfectly and bought in at all the right times after the 3 major market crashes in the last 30 years. And I also tested to see how much money you would have ended up with if you hadn't tried to time the market at all. So in that spreadsheet, I projected what would have happened if you had invested $500 a month into the S&P 500 over a 31-year period using dollar cost averaging. In other words, you invested equal dollar amounts into the same index fund at the same time every single month. And this was whether the market was going up or down. Then I compared that strategy to a market timing strategy where an imaginary investor with psychic abilities timed his purchases with 100% accuracy. What's super interesting is that the investor who invested using dollar cost averaging ended up with $1,183,224, whereas the investor who timed the market perfectly ended up with $1,235,760. In other words, not a huge difference. The dollar cost averaging investor ended up with only slightly less than the investor who times the market perfectly. Given that timing the market isn't even actually possible, I would say that dollar cost averaging is a pretty good way to go. Unless, of course, you actually do have the ability to see the future, in which case we need to talk. But for now, I'm just gonna assume that you aren't able to see the future and that you actually do wanna learn about dollar cost averaging. So in this video, I'm going to explain what dollar cost averaging is and how it works. I'll also talk about why dollar cost averaging is so effective. And finally, I'll show you how to actually do dollar cost averaging in your own portfolio. So if that sounds good to you, give this video a like and let's get right into it. Dollar cost averaging is a strategy where you invest the same dollar amount into the same stock or fund at regular intervals. And this interval can be weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever interval you choose. So let's say you decide to invest $500 into the S&P 500 on the 1st of every month. That means you're buying $500 here, 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 and here, and so on and so forth, every single month. Every time you buy, you're getting in at varying levels of the market. So the number of shares that you get for your $500 will also vary. When the S&P 500 is high, your $500 gets you fewer shares. And when the S&P 500 is low, your $500 will get you more shares. Do you see what's happening there? When the market is high, you buy less shares, and when the market is low, you end up buying more shares. That is how dollar cost averaging works. It's kind of like when you're at the grocery store and you see that something is on sale, you want to load up on it. And then if something's more expensive, you tend to buy less of it. And ironically, when it comes to the stock market, most people end up doing the exact opposite. Right after a big drop in the market, when it's actually the cheapest time to buy stocks, most people don't buy at all. And in fact, they do the opposite, they sell. So we're all guilty of this. As much as we like to think that we're rational human beings when it comes to our money, we're actually more driven by our emotions. So the number one reason why dollar cost averaging is so effective is because it protects us from our own emotions. So this is a perfect segue into what I want to talk about next. Does dollar cost averaging actually work? The short answer is yes, it works. Starting in 1988, if you had invested $500 a month into the S&P 500 with dollar cost averaging, you would have over $1.18 million today. And out of that $1.18 million, only $192,000 of that was money that you actually put in. The rest of it all was stock market growth. Pretty crazy, right? You end up with way more money than you put in. So yes, I would say dollar cost averaging works. But let's go even deeper, shall we? Let's try to understand why it works. So dollar cost averaging is effective for 3 reasons. The first is that it takes emotions out of the equation. And when it comes to investing, Your emotions are your worst enemy. The best time to buy in the market is also going to be the scariest time to buy. So if you invest according to your emotions, you'll end up just chasing the market and getting nowhere. But with dollar cost averaging, you invest like a robot, no matter what. And this results in your average entry price improving automatically over time. The second reason why dollar cost averaging is so effective is that your money has no downtime. In other words, all your investable money is invested at all times. Instead of parking your money in a bank account while you're sitting out and waiting for a better time to buy, all of your money is working for you in the stock market day in and day out. And when your money is working for you in the stock market, you're participating in all the dividends and all the growth that gets compounded over time. People who instead decide not to do dollar cost averaging and they would rather just sit on a bunch of cash until there's a better time to buy, they might risk having their money just sit in a bank account earning nothing for a really long period. And this ends up penalizing their returns over time because they're not collecting any dividends and they're not getting any growth while that money is parked in a bank account. Last but not least, dollar cost averaging works because it's actually doable. Unlike a strategy that requires you to time the market perfectly, dollar cost averaging is actually realistic. Anyone with any amount of time or knowledge has what it takes to implement a dollar cost averaging strategy. Your 6-year-old cousin can do it. My grandmother, who doesn't even know how to turn on a computer, can do it. Even my dog can do it. If you're still not convinced about dollar cost averaging, check out this extreme example. So back in 1989, there was a huge bubble in the Japanese stock market. So in December of 1989, it peaked at around 40,000. And when the stock market bubble burst, it crashed really hard. Let's say you were unlucky enough to buy right at the peak of the market, then 30 years later, you're still in the red. You haven't made your losses back because the Japanese stock market still has yet to recover back to those levels. Scary, I know. However, this is the cool part. If you had followed a dollar cost averaging strategy, just like we've been talking about, you would actually have made money. Even if you started investing right before the crash, if you just kept on dollar cost averaging all the way through, you would end up in the positive today. I think the example of the Japanese stock market bubble is especially relevant today because as of the date that I've recorded this video, December 2019, the US stock market is also at all-time highs. And many people are scared to start investing now because they don't want to be like the people who invested at the very peak of that Japanese stock market bubble in 1989. The US and Japan economies are very different, so I'm not saying that the US is going to be anything like Japan, but still, in market conditions like these, I think the safest way to invest is dollar cost averaging. I wouldn't go all in with my money right now, but I wouldn't be sitting out completely either. Instead, I would take the middle road of dollar cost averaging, where I am investing, but not investing everything at once. So how do you actually do dollar cost averaging? Okay, so this is obvious, but first you need to have a brokerage account. And I always recommend either Fidelity or Vanguard. And you can check out this video right here for more information on the pros and cons of Fidelity versus Vanguard. And once you pick a brokerage, you want to open the right type of account. And for most of you, the best one to start with is a Roth IRA. I have a bunch of videos about Roth IRAs on my channel, so just check it out. They're all on my channel. And if you're not subscribed to my channel yet, then what are you waiting for? Once you have your account set up, the next step is to buy an index fund. In my example earlier, I talked about investing in the S&P 500. And of course, you can't actually invest in the S&P 500 because it's an index, and an index is just a number that's being tracked. So to invest in the S&P 500, you would need to buy an index fund, or a fund that's structured to track and mirror the S&P 500 index. And even beyond S&P 500 index funds, you have a lot of different options. There's also international stock index funds, there's small cap stock index funds, there's emerging market stock index funds. The options are literally endless. For more ideas on how to pick index funds and what kinds of index funds to use for your dollar cost averaging strategy, check out this video right here where I go more into depth. Also, when you're picking index funds, you also want to make sure it's a mutual fund versus an ETF, because ETFs don't allow you to make automatic recurring purchases. But with mutual funds, once you buy into it, you can set it up so that your money will automatically buy more shares of that mutual fund every month. So again, in order to implement dollar cost averaging, you're gonna have to buy the mutual fund version of an index fund and not the ETF. Because with ETFs, there's no way to automatically purchase more every month, unless you want to do it manually, which kind of defeats the whole purpose. So that's pretty much it. To implement dollar cost averaging in your portfolio, you first open a brokerage account, you set up a recurring monthly transfer from your checking account on the first of every month, or whichever day makes sense for your pay schedule. And then you have it buy a fixed dollar amount of your index fund. And then you can just sit back, let it run on autopilot, and just collect those Benjamins. Look, dollar cost averaging is boring. It doesn't make for exciting cocktail party talk, and you're never gonna be featured on the news for being some sort of stock market genius, but it works. Dollar cost averaging is the best way for anyone with any amount of time, knowledge, or money to slowly but surely build wealth. If you choose to go this route of dollar cost averaging, you'll never find yourself obsessing about when to invest, whether to invest, how much to invest. None of this decision fatigue. Instead, you can just have your investments running on autopilot, and so that you can put your energy towards all the other things in your life that you want to do. That's it for now. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate you. I post new videos every Wednesday, so I'll see you next week, same time, same place. Remember to invest early and often, and to boldly and courageously go after the life that you want. I'll talk to you again soon.